Roger, thanks so much for being on the show. I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, I'm excited because you're on the other side of the world, right? So things are often different, right? Building in different climates. I always like having these conversations, understanding, what works in some areas, what doesn't work in other areas, and so forth. So we'll get into that. But before we get into Passive House and who knows where the conversation will go, I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you and your journey. So I'll start with, how did you come to this journey of architecture and specifically Passive House? Where did that interest come from?
Yeah, okay. So I'm originally from the northwest of Ireland. I grew up on a small farm there with a big family, and really the farm life and that sort of connection to nature every day really instilled a love for the environment in me, and I really wanted to ensure that that carried through my whole career in some way. And it took me quite a long time really to find out how I could actually implement that and make it work in architecture. When I went to university, they started talking about sustainability and green buildings. Initially, we thought, "What's that? Do we have to paint them green or something? What is the concept?" It doesn't make any sense. So, back in the 90s, it wasn't really a big deal, but it always just comes back to that connection to land and nature and what we can do to actually make sure that all works for everybody. And really, in architecture, as I said, it took me a while to find out how I could bring that into what I do. And so the Passive House was really just a way of finding a niche, I suppose, that it'll open doors within that environmental side of it, and allowed me to actually put better buildings together that had a lower impact on the environment and took care of it, and really taking what I learned in a farm environment and bringing it into a city and saying, right, well, we can do good things in the countryside, then obviously we can obviously do that as well in the city. So how can I do that? And that was all part of that idea. So it took a long time to get there, and it's only really in the last 10 years or so that I've really been able to take it to that next level.
Do you still live that farm life or want that farm life? Are you in the city at this point?
Yeah, I'm in the city and have been really since I went to college way back in the late 90s. So it's a very different life now, but I do love still getting back out to the countryside and connecting with the roots.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot of I've had a lot of conversation with people too, just about growing food, right? And even if they live in the city, figuring out how to grow food, doing the food forest, even if they have a little patch of grass. So it's super interesting what people are doing now and how I see things changing, which is great. So your farm, so dig a little bit into that. So is your family still, into the farm life? Are they still out in the country and
Yeah,
living
the
out?
family farm is still there. My oldest brother runs it now, and he's changed it a lot from the days when we were small, and it's getting a lot more productive and changing all the time. But it's a wonderful thing to go back there again and spend some time and really reconnect with my childhood and how I grew up, and
Yeah.
the whole being able to make things. And we never had the ability to go out and buy new equipment and so on. We just put it in the workshop and made it work again, and that was a big coming into architecture as well. That ability to make things and create, and that led me into design, and I'm very much about making buildings and the practical side of it, making sure that the way that we document is very clear for the builders and for them to understand exactly how things go together, because I came up with that sort of background, as I said, and it's important for my trade to be able to pass that information on properly, so that there's no second guessing and compromises that happen on site.
Yeah, that's great. Now speaking about passive, we talked a lot about passive house on this podcast before. Are you implementing other things beyond passive? Because passive house is really about the performance of the home, and it doesn't get into materials or really anything else beyond, air tightness and what's a heating, cooling load, that sort of stuff. Are you implementing other things on your projects to go beyond that passive house?
One big development that's happening here that hasn't really taken off prior to recently is structural insulated panels, and I find they're just such an amazing way to actually create a sustainable building. Your continuous insulation, the joints are all seamlessly integrated into each other, and just the speed and the ability to make it airtight really quickly. It's a real game changer in my mind in how you create high performance buildings, and just also the advantages on site in regard to the speed that you can actually create buildings. I think it's got a huge application in urban developments, and being able to roll out a lot more high performance buildings in a really short period of time. Whether that comes down to modularization of buildings, or just having really good suppliers and people that know how to put them together in a quick and an easy way. So I think there's a big avenue for that here. I know where you're from, that's been there for quite some time, but in Australia, yeah, it's really just starting out at this stage.
Yeah, we've seen it. It's been around, but I can't say we've done a project with it. We've talked to suppliers and to clients about it, but at least for what we do, it hasn't made sense a lot of the time, because there's a cost issue there. Still, a lot of people look at it because they think it's going to save them costs, but it doesn't necessarily save costs. It might cost more in some cases, depending on the design. And what it does is, what you mentioned, is it'll save time on site. So if time is a constraint on site, then it makes sense to go that route. But typically we're not going that route. Now, is this something that you're seeing in the custom world, or are you seeing it kind of everywhere where you are?
The suppliers that we're using are seeing it spreading, largely through custom buildings. I think the cost issue is still an issue for a lot of home builders, and that lower end of the market haven't quite been able to tap into it as yet. But I think if we can get it competitive, I think there's a huge market for it there, and doing mass buildings really quickly, and as I said, getting the performance really, really good as well. So if we can get it competitive, and the challenge here is that we can't really get it competitive yet, because the materials are coming from Canada with their OSB boards, and China for the insulation inside, and the panels themselves are actually manufactured in China. So there's also that offset of the transportation and the CO2 that is part of that problem as well. So it's balancing that out really, and making sure that it is a sustainable answer.
Right.
I think it is, but yeah, ideally, obviously, if we can get it manufactured here in Australia, that'll be a big step forward.
Now, what is typical construction in Australia? You're in Melbourne, but what would be kind of code or minimum? What do you typically see in a home for an envelope, maybe for the performance of the windows, as well as HVAC systems, versus what you're doing or what you're trying to push forward?
So this is one of the reasons why I took Passive House on in the first place, is because our minimum standards are really appalling. So we have what's called a NATHER system, which creates a star rating for the building based on performance of external components of the building, but it also takes into consideration energy use, how many lights and electronic equipment and so on that you put into the building, as well as the systems. So it sort of gathers all of that up, but it's really just a paper assessment. And the problem with that is that, as we know in building, that it's near impossible to actually make sure that that paper assessment is seen through to the end of construction in the way that it's supposed to. You know, a
Mhm.
wall that should be R4, by the time it's actually built, might only be half of that, because the insulation is missing in certain areas. There's so much timber in that structure that the insulation is only, you know, 75% of the wall envelope. That's not taken into consideration within the paper assessment. And so it's just a really poor system, and there's no testing on site, and no checking in regard to making sure that these assemblies actually meet the criteria that is set out on paper. And so yeah, for me, that was a big red flag, and in regards also to, you know, clients paying all this money up front for what can be their biggest outlay of their life. And, you know, they're putting a lot of trust in authorities and consultants and builders to get the result right and to give them what they've been promised, and they're just not achieving that when the building's actually being constructed. So passive house is a completely different animal, and the fact that, you know, you got the certification, you've got the tightness testing, you've got all the checks and balances that have to happen the whole way through the construction to ensure that they're getting what they pay for. And yes, it is a bit more expensive, and that's something that has to be taken into consideration. But the payoff in the long run is massively improved, and it's just the quality of building that they get at the end of it. It's just chalk and cheese.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are the requirements for HVAC systems, heating, cooling, ventilation? Is there any considerations for that?
There's no requirements. So in Melbourne, it's fairly temperate the majority of the time, but we do get massive temperature swings often in the same day. And so, you know, we can have 10 to 15 degrees swing in temperature within an hour here. It changes
Oh,
massively
wow.
the direction of the wind in summertime, especially. And the the issue that we have is that our building code is set for the whole of Australia, and Australia's got massive differences within climate from north to south, east to west. But we've got one building code that sort of covers the whole thing, and that just doesn't make any sense, you know. So we do require both heating and cooling and HVAC systems here, and so we typically will go for ducted split systems and so on that are integrated into the buildings. But we're finding with the passive house systems that we can trim a lot of that back, probably to having about a third amount that you would in a traditional build, and just using the heat recovery system and some small heating and cooling systems, then that'll help circulate that throughout the larger building space. So we don't need it in every space anymore.
Right. What systems are you using there? What are the manufacturers? You mentioned mini splits. I think that's what you just said. So
Yeah,
you can zone them, but what manufacturers are there?
I mean, we've probably got a lot of the same ones you do. Daikin is our go-to. So they do high quality equipment generally that's very reliable. There's
Mhm.
also Mitsubishi and a number of other Chinese and Japanese suppliers as well that will bring them in. So
Okay.
yeah, there are plenty of them.
And then are you doing ERVs and HRVs, or does it matter? Like, do you have humidity there? Like, do you have a lot of humidity there where you are,
Not
or across Australia anywhere?
Yeah, further north, it has to be ERVs, but here in Melbourne, HRVs are suffice perfectly.
Okay,
So
great.
we tend to use Zender for ours, which, you know, are a fairly big manufacturer too.
And then when you get into getting certification, well, first, are you getting certification for your projects, or are people aiming to hit the passive house numbers, but not willing to pay for the certification? Because I find that happens a lot here.
Yeah, that's typically what happens here as well. The certification is it's a very onerous process, and also obviously the cost of a certifier on top of it, and also just the ability to be able to tweak the design as you get into the construction phase gets minimized if you have to go down the certification route. Just so much for future planning has to be worked into the design. So it does limit the ability to certify it when you do that, and therefore most clients will say, no, look, we love the whole idea of all of this and we really want to implement it, but we're not willing to pay for the plaque on the wall.
Yeah. That seems to be pretty common across no matter where you are in
Yeah,
the world these days. Now, to hit
yeah.
passive house where you are, what insulation levels are you typically having to hit? I know it'll vary depending on shading and so forth, but
Yeah,
is there a range that you land in?
for external walls, we're typically trying to get around our 5 to 6, and then in roof spaces, our 10 to 12. And yeah, with the SIPS panels, we tend to be able to hit that quite easily, and often exceed those levels and create an even better envelope than what is required, which means then we can, if we use SIPS panels in our climate, means that potentially we can make some compromises on the quality of the window, for instance, and not have to go for triple glazing back to double glazing with argon filled. And we can sometimes even get away with aluminium thermally broken frames with that type of assembly.
That's crazy because we're like minimum building code here is beyond what passive house is where you are. So like minimum building code, and it depends on where you are, but let's say we're building in Ottawa, our wall assembly is typically somewhere around R24 for minimum code. And it depends, there's different packages you can choose. And then the attic is R60, right? So when we're going to passive house in our climate to hit the standards that ultimately are required by passive house, the lowest amount of insulation we did in a wall assembly was R73 or 73 and a half. And the attic was like R100, and windows always have to be triple glazed.
I think what's happening here though is there's a different R value. So I think
right.
yours is based on the imperial system, I think, and ours is based on metric.
That's right. Because we're what's the conversion for that?
I'm not sure. I can't remember. I know I did it whenever I did the course, but I can't recall what the metric is because it wasn't that critical for.
I'm gonna look that up right now.
I think you divide it by like 5.1 or something like that.
Yeah, so I think if we're doing I think that's the RSI, right? If you switch it, because the R value corresponds to the imperial system, while RSI is the equivalent of the metric system. So that makes sense. So if we had to do like R73, so that would have been R12, almost R13 for the RSI. So yeah, I forgot about that. So that makes sense. So you're still going. So say you went for our 5 to 6. So we're still going for that would be R34, where for us, which is still significantly lower. We're doing net zero homes and we're hitting that, but it's still a lot of times these days we're aiming for, there's a new standard. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's net zero energy or net zero energy ready. It's a CHBA standard, which is Canadian Home Builders Association. And that seems to be a good like bang for your buck, so to speak, not to go to the extreme of passive house, but you could still get a very well-built, comfortable home. And in theory, if it's modeled properly and you live in it the way the modeling is done, because I know everyone lives in their houses differently, then you should be able to have a net zero home if you put solar panels on your roof or in a field or depending on where you build.
Right.
But you still get all the benefits of the health and the comfort and the efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, your temperatures would be a lot more extreme than what we would have here. So the requirements that your winter and summers are a lot. Well, our summers are pretty extreme, but our winters, the coldest it gets here in Melbourne's probably 4 degrees in winter. And so
Right. Yeah, that makes
Celsius,
sense.
yeah.
We're getting a lot colder.
Yeah.
So so on that note, actually, I like your slogan for your company, your health, well-being, and performance. So we have health, comfort, efficiency, similar. Well-being, though, what does that mean to you when you have it written in your slogan?
So this really increased in importance during the pandemic in my mind. And so what we found obviously was a lot of people were just spending a lot more time indoors and largely locked at home with their families, and that brought out a lot of issues, and it continues on to today, because a lot of people are still working from home and they're still having that flexible life, and that's bringing a completely different aspect of what the home is and what the home should actually provide for a family. And so it comes from everything from acoustics within the building and how you control and zone the spaces so that you can allow for quiet spaces for work and concentration, but also allow for that family life to still happen. So it's being able to adapt to different scenarios and change as it goes. And the health and well-being aspects of that are massive. They've been just being able to concentrate at home while you're having a meeting without your kids disturbing you. It affects mental health massively, but it also goes into things like the quality of sleep that you can achieve. So again, with the ventilation systems that are included in Passive House, the CO2 levels in bedrooms are consistently managed across every room. And at nighttime, that's really important. When you got 2 adults sleeping in a bedroom with the doors closed, and the bin lorry might come at 6 a.m, so you got the windows closed as well, and the CO2 levels can get up to 2,000 parts per million when it should be around 400 parts per million to just be a natural healthy level. And science has told us that if the CO2 level goes above 1,000 parts per million, it starts to affect your cognitive ability and your ability to fall into deep sleep. And so if you can imagine the effect of not being able to get into deep sleep for every night that you sleep in your bedroom, and how that's going to impact your daily life. If you're a boss at work, you're not making real good decisions at work because you're not concentrating, you're drowsy. Your kids, or maybe you're sending to private school, are not seeing their full potential being reached, and this is all because your house is not performing well, and there's a massive impact on health and well-being and your general life. So we like to see the house as a means to be able to improve your life generally, and just through health and well-being by putting a few small things in place. And yeah, Passive House can really answer those problems.
That's one of the reasons I love having these conversations, because I always learn something new. So you're talking about CO2 in a bedroom, which would just be from a couple sleeping in there, closing everything up and breathing, essentially, correct. Right? So can you say those numbers again? What should they be at, and what can they go up to?
So external air is typically around 400 parts per million. And if it gets to 1,000 parts per million, it starts to affect cognitive ability and the ability to concentrate and fall into deep sleep. And tests have shown that 2 adults sleeping in a bedroom in a completely concealed room, it can get up to 2,000 parts per million.
That's pretty wild. Can you have links? Can you send links on that? I think that'd be great to share. Do you have any info on that?
Yeah, certainly.
So, and then I don't know how much of this you know, but can that be offset? Say you had plants in your room, would that help with the air quality? So that's one of the things we know, like the plant mother-in-law's tongue can can really help with indoor air quality. But I don't know how many plants you would need to have in a bedroom. Say somebody couldn't go to the passive house route, or they're just like, okay, well, I didn't know that, and I live in this house now. What can I do now? I'm just thinking about what are some options people can do.
Yeah, look, I don't have facts on that, but certainly I know plants obviously they suck up carbon dioxide, but to what extent and whether it would do it quickly enough and over one night, for instance, I'm not sure whether it's got the ability to do that.
Hmm.
But it would be interesting one to look into that to see whether there would be an offset there. Obviously, the easiest thing that people can do is open their window, and getting that fresh air to come into their spaces will neutralize the air again and bring it back to normal levels. But of course, that's not always possible. So um, we're really talking about the ideal scenario here. If you're going to create a brand new house from scratch, it needs to be future centric and fit for purpose for any scenario. And if you're doing that, then yeah, passive house is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. So yeah, I look forward to seeing some of that info. Make sure we share that. And what about things like light or greenery? So if you're doing a lot of houses in a city, for example, I'm not sure in Melbourne what you're looking out into, but I know that can have a big effect on well-being and the occupants and their mental health within the space as well. I'm assuming you put a lot of thought into that, and just wondering what are some
Yeah.
things that you work into your designs.
Yeah, so always when we start out doing a concept plan of any sort, it is always about that connection from inside to out. So any views through the house, whether it be from the front door, you're looking through a courtyard into outside space, so that you get this sort of staged effect of landscape as you venture through the house, and that you're never really too far away from it in any single space. Obviously, that connection to outside space has got a huge effect on our ability to actually feel well. That's been proven time and again. There's a hospital here in Melbourne, for a children's hospital, that's been completely designed around that idea as well, that people will feel better generally if they're connected to nature, and what better place to do it than in a hospital, right?
Yeah, that's great, because there's so many hospitals are just terrible, right? For so many reasons.
Absolutely. So that's a massive part of it, certainly. And we do full height glazing generally where we can, so that you have that uninterrupted connection and that inside outside space. And again, our climate here suits the ability to do that as well, where we can eat outside quite often throughout the whole year, and socialize outside, but also just the ability then to shut it off and have that same activity just inside, but still have the connection, is really important. So yeah, we use greenery a lot, but we also try and add in water features and the like as well, but try and make that as sustainable as possible, so it's captured water and it's not coming from mains.
Yeah, I've been impressed with like water features and how they can drown out city noise, like when you're outside in a space, to have those water features. I didn't realize how much of an effect until I started to see it in action, right? And it is really great.
Yeah, correct. And also the other thing that we love doing is trying to create green roofs where we can as well. So it just brings in a lot more biodiversity back into the city again. You get a lot more insects, butterflies and moths and flies and bees and so on, that just will start pollinating again and bringing back nature, which has really been absent and continuing to be absent from our cities. And again, this comes back to my upbringing and being surrounded by that all the time. And I really want my buildings to have that connection again, and the people that live there to feel like they do live in the natural world and not in a built up metropolis.
Yeah, that's fantastic to hear. Now, what are, I want to go back, this could be, I guess, business or construction related. What are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing today?
The biggest challenge in trying to create high performance homes right now is just being able to get the word out there and inspiring people to do this. And because, there's been a lot of press that say, they're going to raise our minimum code standard here from 6 stars to 7 stars, and everybody's freaking out about it, that it's going to be, so hard to achieve, and we're not going to have any windows left because there's going to have to be so much insulation in the walls, and it's all rubbish, really. It just needs more consideration in the design and how you put things together. It's really educating the market is, I find, the biggest challenge at this stage, and bringing them on board with this idea that if you're going to create a high quality home, it has to be high performance. It has to have health and well-being aspects. It has to be fit for the future and deal with the energy crisis that we now have, that's only going to be a bigger problem in the future, and be as self-sufficient as possible. And so it's trying to tell people about this and spread the word as much as possible. And it needs to go well beyond the buildings that I can produce. I need to try and educate other architects. And one of the things I'm trying to do is try and educate clients to inform their architect about what is a good building as well, because a lot of our architects are, going down the bandwagon of saying, right, well, we can create a 7-star home, it'll be fantastic, but 7-star is actually just about meeting minimum standards, and one step below that and you're illegal, right? So
yeah, exactly.
not a high quality home, but they market it that is a high quality home. So one of the tools that we're aiming to put out there at the minute is a workshop where we invite potential clients to come in and learn how they should brief their architect. And so it takes into consideration all of these aspects. So ask them about health and well-being, how they integrate that into their building, and creating a sustainable life for them in the building. Create questions that are around the performance of the building, how they achieve it, and what they can do to go beyond the minimum standard, and what that means, and how that is going to be certified and checked off during the whole design construction process. Ask them about the functionality of the building, how that relates to their health and well-being, and the connection of spaces, and the ability to adapt in the future and change with their family life over time. So there's a lot of different aspects in there that we can educate clients, that will in turn educate architects and force architects to think more about this. And there's no better way in my mind of making change than have it come from the masses. And
yeah, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why we love having these conversations and getting it out there, because we know we can't build or design for everybody. But if everyone starts to become more interested in it, then they will start asking for more. And then hopefully we start to see more of a change. Absolutely. Another thing, on the, I guess, sustainability side, or if you're thinking about just overall health of the planet, that I found is, even outside of construction, I watched a documentary recently, came out a couple of years ago, called Kiss the Ground. Have you seen or heard of it?
No, I haven't.
So it's really great. It's narrated by Woody Harrelson. I don't know, he obviously had a good partner, but it's on Netflix. I'm assuming you would get it out there too. I'm not sure. I know it changes depending on which country you're in. But I thought it was really great because it aligned with some other videos that I had seen where it talks a lot about the soil conditions, right? So there's a big push for lowering carbon footprint, right? Producing less carbon dioxide and so forth. But the idea is, okay, well, that's all great, but that's not going to help everything, right? That's not the solution. That's kind of a Band-Aid fix if we reduce some things. But at the end of the day, we technically do need carbon dioxide. Our plants thrive off of that, right? If you have greenhouse, you're in farming, right? So I don't know if you have greenhouses, but if you have greenhouses, you pump CO2 into those greenhouses to help the plants grow, right? So the idea behind the video and the message that they're trying to portray is like, look, yeah, reduce it. That's how I'm not saying not reduce it, but the bigger problem is reducing the better solution is to improve the soil conditions so that the soil becomes a carbon sponge and we can start growing things properly and stop farming the way that we farm and so forth. So what I've started telling people is like, look, if you're not sure, you can't build a passive house right now, or you can't move, or you can't do an energy retrofit or whatever it may be, just buy organic food. Just by buying organic food, you promote healthier soil, because they'll hopefully, you never know how these things are being regulated, but in theory, those foods that are being grown organically are actually regenerating our soils and actually helping reduce the carbon that's being offset. And there's all sorts of, there's videos out there of NASA when the farmlands are being tilled. So when they're basically breaking up the soil every year, the carbon dioxide gets released into the atmosphere is absolutely bonkers. So there's a ton of ways that people can help, even if they can't necessarily do it through building a passive house or renovating their house.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And coming back to farming again, that was something that we learned later, I suppose, and it probably took until the 2000s where we stopped plowing fields every year for crops. Instead, we started to till them lightly on the top and just turning a small portion over to enough to get the seeds to root.
Amazing.
It just stopped all that CO2 being released, and it made everything grow better. Obviously helped the environment from the not releasing that CO2 into the atmosphere. But yeah, every little helps.
Okay, so this has been great, Roger. What are you doing? So you mentioned that you're talking to clients, or doing these workshops. The workshops that you're doing, is it people from all over? Is it just potential clients? Because I'm just wondering what kind of interest you're getting in that, or if you haven't launched it yet, maybe you're not sure, but I'd be curious to know if there's a lot of people coming, even if maybe they're not planning on building right now, maybe they're planning for the future, they're trying to figure out what to do. I'd love to know what kind of traction you're getting with that.
Yeah, look, it's still very fresh. We've only just launched it, so to date, I've got no data to share really in regard to it, but we certainly do envisage it for the wider population, people who maybe plan a home, in 5-10 years time. It doesn't really matter, but it's about education. It's about them having the tools and arming themselves properly so that whenever they do start this journey of searching for the architect, they've got the right information and they know and they can educate themselves on what's important. Because obviously architects, and there's a fantastic architects around, and Melbourne's got amazing architects. Some of the work that they're creating is fantastic, but they're not always answering a lot of these questions. And they look fantastic in a magazine, and I'm sure at certain times of the year they're good to live in, but at other times of the year they're going to be dreadful to live in. And whenever we're creating a building now, we're not actually creating it for now, we're creating it for the future. We're hoping these buildings are going to be around in 50 to 100 years time, and what does that future look like, and what does it look like if we build a code compliant building? So to me, that just is the question that we want our clients and clients of any sort of building to ask themselves. What are we actually commissioning here, and what impact have on society, the environment, their children, and children beyond that as well. It's a much bigger question than just us wanting to build one single home for our own family, for our vanity, for whatever reason we want to do it. It goes well beyond that.
Absolutely. What are you most excited about for the future? That could be technology, it could just be developments within your business, anything.
We're actually starting a little joint venture with a couple of other industry professionals as well. We're coming on board with an interior design company as well as a builder as well, to offer a design and build, but a completely customizable design and build process that focuses on high performance buildings. And so I think that's going to be quite exciting for us here, because there's nobody doing that at the moment. There are lots of design and build companies out there that again are creating really good buildings, and there's ones that are doing it on template basis, that are creating okay buildings. It's not always suited to the site, and it's not always ideal for that given family, but being able to customize it and add these layers of high performance to make a really high quality building is really exciting. And as I said, it's the work we do in the high quality residential space. It's really a catalyst in regard, for us at least, to be able to educate the wider market. We see ourselves a bit like a Formula One racing team, where we've got all the finances and the ability to do R&D and testing, and we've got the money and from clients coming in that want to invest and try out these ideas and make sure that it works. But the whole industry can learn from this, right? So that we can roll this out to a much wider population, and that's kind of the idea and why I'm so excited about getting into this space and being able to educate people and be on shows like yours and hopefully inspire more people to do it.
That's so great. Before I let you go, Roger, any parting words of advice?
I think I'll just go back to the idea again that we don't create buildings for now. We create it for the future, and it is really about that long-term vision. And the whole of society right now knows what's at stake if we don't do this right, and that's really important that we do pay due attention to this. And we've got a huge part to play, every single person, and we can do it. We can certainly make this a better world just through making small changes.
Absolutely. Roger, thanks so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially knowing it's almost tomorrow where you are right now. So thank you so much.
No problem. I'll head to bed right now.
Did you know that on average, year after year, over the last 10 years, electricity has gone up by 20% across the US? If you live in the US and you want to beat the utility company at their own game, I have partnered with Apricot Solar and Freedom Forever to save you thousands of dollars. Because of high tax incentives and solar decreasing in costs by 50% over the last 10 years, there has never been a better time to add solar to your home. If you're interested in seeing if your home qualifies, you can head to theconsciousbuilder.com/solar. And don't worry if you don't have the money up front. As I mentioned before, there are great financing options that can get you solar for $0 up front. Once again, that's theconsciousbuilder.com/solar. Until next time, I'm Casey Gray, and remember to live consciously.